channel. So welcome everybody. This is another episode in the HRUG Open Talks, Human Rights Universal and Global, in case you were wondering what the acronym HRUG, H-R-U-G, stands for. Now you know. So in this latest installment in the HRUG Open Talks, where our principal speaker, our speaker, in fact, is Professor Peter Herrmann. He's a research fellow at the Human Rights Centre in Central South University in Changsha, and I won't go. Time is too brief to go into a list of his other distinctions, but that description should suffice for now. So I'm going to. I think the format. Sometimes we have. Or the general format for these discussions is we have a speaker who talks for an allotted period of time on a particular topic, and sometimes we have nominated respondents, but I don't think that's the case today, unless I'm mistaken. So the format of the meeting will be Peter will do a presentation, and then there'll be a general discussion afterwards, and we will end as promptly as possible at the top of the hour, whatever time it is in your time zone. So I'm going to hand over to Peter. Peter, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. The topic, democracy, populism, and fascism. And of course, it's linked, going back to the elections of Trump, re-election in a way, even if there was a term between. But it is as well about more the general issue, what are we actually facing at this stage in politics? And looking at the United States, you can start with the smear comedy. I'll just read some passages first from Mr. Trump. I'm going to tell you, it's sort of sad. We have been on this journey together, he said. When you think about it, we have created the greatest movement in the history, probably mankind, but certainly within the United States. MAGA, Make America Great Again. Now, Make America Great Again is something where you can actually replace the first A by G, by F, by in a way by Ireland, France, Germany, Poland, whatever. It's nationalism and this predominance of one state. Another quote, special counsel prosecutors, smear comedy, dismissed the 2 federal criminal cases against Donald Trump in separate court filings on Monday, as they bowed to the reality that they would not be completed or prosecuted, the trial before Trump returns to the presidency next year. There is always this issue of law, legality highlighted as being important, and this shows that when it comes to applying law in certain cases, it doesn't count at all. The Memphis florist said she didn't want to serve supporters of Donald Trump. Now she's not serving anyone else either. Kristen Walter has closed her shop for the rest of the week due to threats to me and my business, according to the statement she made on the now private Instagram account of Everbloom. She knew about what is going to happen, but she stood to her opinion, and now it's threatened. She is threatened. After weeks, this is a very recent one, after weeks of delays, Donald Trump has initiated the procedure for taking office. In doing so, the president-elect's team has dispensed with the usual ethics declarations and FBI security checks. Interesting, again, if you look at law and then the power of the president. Changing the stage. In Germany, yesterday it was disclosed the liberals planned a coup d'etat D-Day scenario, actually they prepared the former, the state government of the traffic light coalition. All this, I think, is interesting. You could go on endless with such statements where you think, what is actually going on? Is this just personal behavior, misbehavior? Is it actually criminal behavior in the case of Trump? Trump may be obsessed by himself, in part suffer from some psychological defects. But the problem is not any kind of madness or something like this. No, it's not fascist ideology. It's the problem of society. And this is, of course, not a fascist society, but there's something wrong in the society that actually makes it possible that politics, not policies, politics happens in this way. Famous United States researcher on the topic of fascism, what you ought to be studying is the milieu out of which they grew. For fascism to take root, there needs to be an opening in the political system, which is the loss of traction by the traditional parties. There needs to be a real breakdown. But this is, I think, what we have to look at, the breakdown of society, not of personalities with their charisma moving on and gaining support, but really the problems of society. A society that lost, I think, more or less completely its standards, ethical standards, legality, justice, or whatsoever, and that lost coherence. Now, is actually, as it's often said, is Trump a populist? I think we have to be careful with this as well. For the same reason, there is no real populace, because the population is more and more divided, separated. The inequalities are increasing again. And in addition, terms like populism, and I think this is important for us, for left, whatever this is, terms like populism, neoliberalism, even capitalism are overused. There is no clear definition of what we're actually talking about. As I said, neoliberal in these terms, but as well when we talk about left, when we talk about critique. Back to this Mr. Paxton, it seems doubtful that some common intellectual position can be the defining character of movements that valued action above thought, the instincts of the blood above reason, duty to the community above intellectual freedom, and national particularism above any kind of universal value. Is fascism an ism at all? He argues it is not. It is more about feelings than any ideology. And I think this is important as well when it comes to an alternative. The AfD, Alternative for Germany, they actually jump on this boat as well about feelings, not about any coherent ideology. Still, if we look at the ideology, and there's a 900-page document published in the United States, Trump distancing himself from this, but at the same time replicating exactly this program. It's about radical centralism. It's about presidential control of all federal offices, including the Ministry for Justice. So, do anything wrong, you are in control of the Ministry for Justice, and nothing happens. A radical overhaul of the educational system. I mentioned this in this background paper. It's unbelievable what he actually says in this respect. A radical exchange of personnel in the federal offices. Now, this is always happening in the United States, but in this case, it's more extreme and it's a systematic strategy. And the suspension of the separation of power. So the polity actually is attacked. questions. Also coming now to the original title, where I said, if Trump would be left, he would be right. We would agree with this policy. It is, I think, something where we have to be aware and careful what we are actually saying. Many of these points are actually directed against the left. However, this left, we may ask if it actually exists. There is no, now looking especially at the countries I know, it's France, it's Germany, there is no real unity. There are different, many different, sometimes many different new fractions. In Germany, it's now the Sarah Wagenknecht movement. It's limited, the left, whatever it is limiting its program points on individual aspects. There is no coherent policy. They have exactly lost this holistic view. And because of the split in many different fractions, it is as well too small. There is no real relevant group. We have had it in Italy for a long time. We have had it in France for a long time, where the communist parties have been very strong. We have in France discussion in the party, within the party, if we should not kind of replace ourselves by being a political movement. There we come to this point in a kind of populist way. Now, it's not this extreme, but we are taking actually many aspects from this kind of populist, if you want, populist ideology. There we come to this point, we are more and more, the left, whatever it is more and more jumping on this boat of identity politics. It is important to address different aspects, different interests in the population, but not a coherent program. So, in a way, even if it is over the point a little bit, in a way, doing exactly that, what Trump does, addressing different people. Now, and if we look at Trump, if we look at the liberals in Germany, if we look at all these populist movements, we see actually that there are many things they address where kind of everybody would agree. Critique of red tape. Who would not criticize red tape? Critique of the educational system. In Berlin, where I lived for a while, the schools are actually in a disastrous condition that people actually say it's too dangerous to leave our children to go there. Critique of the tax system. The tax system is extremely coherent in terms of distribution from the bottom to the top. Societal solidarity doesn't exist simply because we are all egoists. We have to fight for our position, and we cannot behave in a solidaristic way. Trade unions have difficulties with memberships, and. Then, of course, issue of migration. At least it is a topic that where we have of people migrating that needs to be addressed. No. Importantly, this critique coming from the AfD, from Trump, from whatever, goes hand in hand with proposals. This is what we have to change. This is what we have to do. Again, importantly, critique and the suggested solutions are extremely incoherent, full of contradictions. If you look at what Trump says about tax policies to come, there is no system, there is no clear line. Actually, he proposes in the one program something that would contradict his suggestions in another program. And then, of course, what they do, or what they have, it's charisma. I showed this photo, Trump shared the screen. You find many of these photos. It's not only Trump, it is Elon Musk, it's others as well. It's equaling, this charisma is equaling strength and sort of kindness. Interestingly, if you go through different reports, for instance, the BBC is not criticizing, is not objectively presenting what happened in the United States, but it is a kind of, yeah, come back, the Americans want it, that's democracy. If you, I could quote this BBC News, I think it's kind of shocking how supportive they are actually to this. How did we get there? Another quote from this Elizabeth Sirofsky, who interviewed Mr. Paxton. Steinmetz Jenkins told me that he objects to the attitude that what matters is winning, so let's create an enemy, let's call it fascism for the purpose of galvanizing consensus. And this kind of politics, Kimmich notes, also comes with its own dangers. Sometimes waving that banner, you fascists on the other side, and then we have the valiant anti-fascists. It's this they and we. It's not discussing problems, political problems. It's not about strategy, but it is to a large extent labeling and not really analyzing and trying to move forward. Moving forward, what does it mean? What we find in terms of getting us there where we are now, denial of problems, of challenges. What I said, migration is happening. It's not a problem as such, but if it is not issued, then it is. Look back at the Netherlands. Everything was fine. It was ignored that people came into the country. There was no policy of integration, of respect, or whatsoever. They had been just left on their own, and Mr. Van Gogh had been killed. Then there was a problem. Then there was a real problem, actually. It is as well the German supplementary budget actually the reason that the coalition broke up. Clinging to the illusion, and this was some point Dr. Fischer made recently, the illusion of Western liberalism. Western liberalism, that was the paradise, so to say, in Fischer's understanding, and it was not considered that there was a background of this Western liberalism that actually was, an illusion, an ideology, not a reality. If everybody is standing on the tiptoes, nobody can see better. As I said before, individualism, competition, and this is in a way what we all have to do if we want to survive. Now, again, over the top. And there is something of humiliation. After the First World War, France, Germany, United States of America as well, had been humiliated by the international war situation. This kind of humiliation we do not find today, but make America great again. There is a loss of this imperial power these countries have or could in one way or another claim. And this brings them to this position of Tina. There is no alternative, Margaret Thatcher, so another historical figure, if you want, standing behind what we see today. Now, a very important point, this entire idea of democracy today, Western democracy, is what Helmut Schelsky calls the level of middle-class society. Thanks to one of the participants, not to say the moderator, I received an article from United, what was it? New York Times. That was the Rubicon Mr. Street believes. The first time after the post-war growth period, the states took to introducing not yet existing future resources into the conflict between labor and capital. They never broke this habit, living on the cost of the future of the next generation. Nevertheless, what I think it is interesting, what the newborn Marxist, he was Mr. Streeck was really kind of old-fashioned social democrat. After he retired, he is now declared Marxist. Interesting in itself. I wouldn't. He does some really good analysis. Anyway, what he dismisses with this, or what he ignores with this living on the future generation is nothing else than a redefinition of the class conflict, of the distribution from the top, from the bottom to the top. It is another issue, and this came up in Germany over the last year, after 1989, the regional disparities, East and West, that always did exist, but now had been instrumentalized by the right populist, fascist, quasi-fascist movements. It's the same what the OECD does, what the EU does, moving into this kind of separation. Again, the model of Western liberalism, combining the bourgeois and the citoyen revolution, is important as a model that actually couldn't work. Liberalism in this way was contradicting the bourgeois economic interest of making profit of individualism. I think this is important to really go to the roots of all what we have, the problems we have today. What can we do? Of course, we have to counter these attacks with demonstration, with mass rallies, with as well legal cases against these forces. But I think what is more important, we have to develop a positive approach to what actually there is an alternative, a real alternative, to have a coherent program. Clearly defining politics and policies with the complexities and not saying, no, there is a way we can easily find through it. Energy, digitization, all this, there are problems and we have to face them and we have to say, these are problems and this is the way we have to move against. Which means the arrogance of the Western orientation, the Western liberalism. I saw today, just before we started the Social Europe announcement, can we export European values? Are we so perfect that we have to even export our values, not in a way of cooperation, but of exporting them? Question mark, I have my doubts. Not least, if we talk about these values, at least one of the values is the beautiful social policy and social security system. Interestingly, not an invention by Mr. Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, but an invention by, perhaps somebody heard this name, Mr. Itzenplitz. Itzenplitz had been the Minister for Foreign Trade. And this is the foundation of this stick and carrot policy, carrots and sticks, moving this way to make offers to the population with the social teaching by the Catholic Church, and again this capitalistic policy. Coherent approach means really addressing tax issues. I think this is something we always forget, making here a little bit change, moving a screw there, but to have a coherent approach. Income tax, corporate taxes, inheritance tax, you name it. It's all at the moment a matter of distribution, this way coherent distribution from the bottom to the top, from today and tomorrow in different regions and so on and so forth. Control of enterprises, undermining capital flight. It is possible, but it is not done. It is possible, as we saw, not least in the case of Ireland, where Microsoft or Apple had been fined to pay taxes. And there we could actually saw the cooperation between enterprises and the corporate business and the government. International cooperation. It's not about competition, securing income not simply in terms of income, the money get into your account, but in terms of quality of healthcare. I attended yesterday an OECD meeting where it had not been addressed. First, that migration is actually a way to secure in some countries healthcare, but taking the resources from other countries. There's a terrible movement that actually destroys other countries' health systems, healthcare systems, systematically. Interesting that the OECD, not populist, doesn't address these issues. Actually, I dared to intervene, and then they said, yes, this is a very important point. We have to do this in the future. Now, a little joke at the end, at the side, in a side when the meeting was closed by Nicola Brandt, she said, there are many open questions, and that's good because that secures our jobs. Okay, great. Don't address too many things because we need something to do in the future. Housing. Housing is a major problem in most of the countries, including Ireland. I just read a notice because there are other elections today in Ireland. Housing is one of the major problems, apparently. And that means homelessness. Reduction of working time. I think this is as well something we neglect. There had been this strong movement. A reduction of working time. I worked with Paul Boccarat on this concept of sécurité d'emploi ou de formation. So make education, formation, make this an inherent part of the entire system, not just getting people in employment, but having qualified employment. And we all know that this is lacking. Cooperatives, public banking, we all know this. If we move this into a coherent concept, including then tax policies and I think this is something we can argue against populism. Social services of general interest are privatized now under the head of the European Union. Goes on since 1995, moving on and on and on. The left didn't really engage in this question. So I come to the end with two issues. The one is in the left, it's broad understanding, treating each other with respect. And I think this is in many cases lacking, that people do not engage in discussions, engage in positive, developing positive concepts. As said, I know this especially from Germany in the last year or something, what happened there. there was no issue of respect. It was just a power struggle. Another thing, and there's, I don't know if this is simply social romanticism of an old person who thinks back of the good old times, or even if this is actually something very dangerous. The fascism, dopo lavoro in Italy under Mussolini, durch Freude, the German fascism, fascist movement, actually saying we have to offer something for the time of lavoro, after work, the leisure time. But at the same time, I think it is important that left culture, if I use this vague term, is actually missing. That is linked to respect. It is an issue where we actually have say we are not only working for the improvement of living conditions, but we are actually in our programs opening as well to develop a common understanding of what we are, what we actually are, what we want. Not this one point focused demands, but having a concept against it. So I'll stop there. Not dopo lavoro, dopo la presentazione, and hope to have a discussion on this thing. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Peter, for that wide-ranging presentation. I think from Trump to, I don't know what, from some kind of snazzy subtitle, or even snazzier subtitle to your subtitle. So lots of food for thought there, and I should have mentioned as well, and just to remind you that I don't know if that's going to be on. Is it on the HRUG website, Peter? You circulated a paper as well, or a discussion document to kind of accompany your presentation. Will that be available?
That was a kind of background development document. You find it in the blog of HRUG-LEGAL.
Yes. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to, in this particular episode, as you might say, of the HRUG Open, we don't have nominated discussants, which we sometimes do in other episodes. So I'm going to throw the discussion open to the floor. I'm using, apologies for the limitations in my technology, I'm using my mobile phone, so I can't see everybody on the screen at the one time. So if people would just, maybe I'll just see if I can, if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question. Peter, clearly the vast span of your presentation and your immense erudition has stunned people into temporary silence. Can I ask? Can I take? Mehmet. Oh, sorry, Mehmet. Excuse me, Mehmet. Yes.
Okay, one moment, please. I will lower my hand. So, thank you, Peter. First of all, I have to admit I did not understand everything acoustically. It's the other problem. But I will say some things which are coming in my mind concerning the left and concerning human rights, concerning the Trump-Harris campaign. I have the feeling that the left in the West especially, so we can say Western left, or we can say a sort of Western humanitarian Marxism, which has been splitted from orthodoxy since the October Revolution. This is my thesis. And so nowadays the left in the West has so much focused on the how can we say, on the simplicity and how can we say, evilness of Trump, that this left has totally forgotten that Kamala Harris did not represent anything different. So what Kamala Harris did was to promote identity and ethnicity. And for me, this is totally boring. I would never give anyone my vote only because she or he is, for example, black or white or whatever. This is no political standpoint to speak of your own identity. So, and the other thing is what is really has dominated in this campaign. So I think it's more the problem of so-called Western democracies represented by Harris than of Trump. Kamala Harris was presented in the Western media, especially in Germany, as a heroine of freedom, of individualism. But Kamala Harris did exactly represent oppression, a bad form of individualism, the so-called individual ideals of America, the ideals of the settlers having exploited and also exterminated the Indian population, etc., etc. So this was the American dream, somehow. And Kamala Harris did always, how can we say, articulate this sort of imperialist American dream, which is still present in the world, as something totally democratic, as something totally social. And so I think, again, I have to say it. I think the left in the West is totally misguided by this propaganda. They have forgotten that behind the discourse of individualism, there is still the fact of imperialism. Nothing has changed in this context. And so the problem of Trump, I would say, is the problem of the Western values, what Peter said. It's the problem of the so-called American dream. And it is the problem, to say it exaggerated. I know I speak very short. Normally we have to write articles about this. It is the problem of a left in the West, which has nothing to do, in my opinion, anymore with the historical emergence of the traditional left, focusing on social equality. So the problem of Trump is in fact the problem of Kamala Harris and the problem of these so-called Democrats who are not democratic. Because everything which was done in America, in the USA, concerning military coups, the support of Latin American dictatorships, 60s, 70s, Uruguay, Chile, was mostly done by people like Kamala Harris. And we should also not forget that the most important warfares which was done, for example, were done by Bush and by Barack Obama. So I only wanted to think loud. This is something which is always forgotten in the very descriptive Western so-called leftist media. For example, in Germany, to say it to our friends, because as Peter knows, I'm following Germany intensively all the time. Even more than Turkey, because I live in Turkey, so I know my country, but I have to inform myself much more about Germany. And there are interesting journals, for example, the Taz. It's a so-called leftist newspaper, the Taz, which was established in the beginning of the 90s, I remember very well. And the Taz is really doing what I mentioned, presenting Kamala Harris as the hero of democracy, as I said again, which is not true. This is what comes in my mind. And so again, to say it again, the point, the problem of the elections was Kamala Harris, was not Trump. This is my understanding of this election campaign. And we have now in Germany similar things. In February, we have early elections in Germany, and we will see what will happen. Because the Social Democrats will not gain too much votes, I think. The Christian Democrats will get about 30, and the right-winged AfD will also get more votes. And then we will see what the coalition will be built. And then we will see that the Western German Democrats will make a coalition with the AfD, form informally. And most of the things which are presented as humanitarian, like the so-called reform of migration in the European Union, will already continue. And I think bad times will come to the history of the migrants in Germany, I say to my students, for example, I always say to my students, okay, you can go to the West because of material reasons, but don't think that your situation will politically get better in the short or long run. It will get worse. This is what I learn, how I have learned and know about the elections. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mehmet. I don't know if Peter, do you want to take those as kind of observations and comments rather than questions? Will I leave the floor open for the
Well, leave it
moment?
open, but before Mehmet raised his hand, you wanted to say something, or was it a wrong impression?
No, yeah, I'll take my turn. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was being somewhat facetious when I was characterizing your presentation as wide-ranging, but of course it was, as you know, very, very wide-ranging, and you use the term populism, and of course you said it's important to, it's an ill-defined term, and in your presentation, you nonetheless, I know you can't do everything in a presentation, but you didn't define it specifically. I don't think. So obviously, populism can refer to a whole range of phenomena. But as you mentioned, some of the constituents of those phenomena, such as focus on kind of migration and national identity. I think you could have been emphasized perhaps a bit more, because certainly the regimes that are generally accepted as populist typically emphasize it's an ethno-nationalism, an ethnic nationalism. So the national identity is it's people within the state, but often the people within the state are people who are somehow the original inhabitants of the state. There's that kind of Trump has been accused of using Nazi type language in terms of blood and so on. So that language of I think that the ethnic nationalist aspect of populism deserves more emphasis perhaps than you were able to give it in the presentation. But relatedly, I suppose two points. One is about, and again, I know you weren't addressing this specifically, but the idea of, and Mehmet mentioned the West, and of course, the West is such an elastic term. Often it means Western Europe, or sometimes it means English-speaking countries, which, and you've got the global North, so all these kind of various pretty kind of vague terms. But we've seen populism, however you define it. For example, in Latin America, for example, Bolsonaro was an avowed supporter of Trump and admirer of Trump, and in fact, he's facing legal investigation for supposedly perhaps plotting a coup to stop Lula from succeeding him as president. So obviously and in Europe itself, you've got Orban in Hungary, for example. So in terms of the geographical designation, the West, populism obviously exceeds those geographical boundaries, perhaps. The other question, or the other point, is about comment is, Peter, would you say a little bit more about the title of your paper? In fact, was if Trump were left, would he be right? Just a broad distinction between the content of the policies, and you talked about the incoherence of a lot of populist policies, or about the incoherence of many of Trump's policies, but the content of the policies and the policy proposals, but the method of governance. So you have Trump as weakening various types of democratic norms and safeguards, and threatening the rule of law by absorbing the Department of Justice and nominating civil servants and so on. And that strongman approach has been widely admired, and again is one of the perhaps one of the common themes in populism and the appeal of populism. The people, or some of the people, are frustrated with the not simply bureaucracy and so on, but also the checks and balances in representative democracies, parliamentary democracies, and would prefer to see a much more centralized and efficient type of system. And obviously, you've got the appeals of Trump has expressed admiration for China, for Hungary, for Putin, in fact, in Russia. So there's a whole kind of range of that kind of centralized, very efficient governance is a big appeal of Trump as well. So if Trump were left, would he be right? Maybe you could just say a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Well, another 2 hours. Of course, it's necessarily broad. One point you mentioned at the end, Joe, is, and this is often forgotten, I think, many of the votes for whatever these populist movements are, AfD, Trump, whatsoever, are actually not so much, where there are kind of mixture between voting against the established party system, against the policies that exist, and in favor of something that is presented. And this is something where actually Trump managed very well, including actually Berlusconi in Italy years ago, using the public self-presentation in an extremely good way. Trump addressing industrialists, Trump addressing even Puerto Rico, the people of Puerto Rico. He would strongly, in political terms, be against them. At the same time, he managed, in his presentation, when he talked to relevant people, he didn't say I'm Puerto Rican, but in this way of, yes, we do the best. Presenting to himself to industrialists, to Puerto Rico, to workers, he managed perfectly to fade out anything that would contradict. So I think this is an important point. It's not voting in favor of, but against. And then this nationalism is important, I agree. At the same time, I would have a little bit of problem with ethno-nationalism. Because this, again, this nationalism question is a kind of complex, difficult, contradictory one. My students have been taught by this every year. I came up with this little gnome with brown hairs, probably brown eyes, standing in front of the German people, 33 and following, the blonde Aryan strong figure. How is this possible? There was no ethno-nationalism. This was simply a nationalism. Psychologically, he managed to sell this as I said, he was a gnome, he was not strong, he was not blonde, he was contradicting. In the United States, you would not have this kind of ethnic identity. If you look at the history, and historically it's a short history, there are many ethnic groups standing against the Indians, the Aborigines, the indigenous people. But this is their national identity. And I don't know who was it, Tonius, I think, speaking of a melting pot. bringing people together, many different ethnic groups. And I think this is an important point where we have to define actually this MAGA, what this A actually means. It can mean very different things. And then I think it is important what Mehmet said as well. It had been the success of Trump had been very much the lack of success of the arguments, or the lack of arguments on the side of Kamala Harris. Having said this, I would go, and this is in the background paper, I made this clearer, I would go a step further and say, and then you come to this Western thing. I mentioned Western liberalism, and this is going back to the Western, especially German Enlightenment and Scottish Enlightenment. This idea of individualism, of competitiveness. Ricardo, with his economic theory, highlighting it is this individual success, is this individual that actually defines this liberalism. And this is, I think, important when it comes to this question of West. On the one hand, we have, of course, differences within this Western regional area. We have even the small and the large Europe, the Council of Europe and the European Union. These are in detail important things, but at the same time, I think, and then we come to this question of a difficult question that we find today in the broadest sense West. On the one hand, nationalism, renationalization. Ursula von der Leyen now again president of the Commission, and this means Germany being president there. At least it was the idea of Angela Merkel. At the same time, we have the West and the East. And of course, again, West and East are two broad terms. But I think it is interesting that in many broadly Western countries, including Australia, for instance, which is not really West, problems, challenges, being addressed in a way that had been up to recently criticized, especially when it comes to China. Control of the internet. That's Australia introduced yesterday, I think, or the day before, a measure of controlling the internet. If this happened, or what happened in China in terms of controlling the internet, pedophilia, pornography and all these things, this was dictatorial. Now it's done by the West, Australia. We are not looking at the problems. We are too much focusing on polities and contradictions between the different systems. Not going back enough to the roots of, and then this broad term again of the ideology we're facing today. And coming again back to Kamala Harris, it is interesting as well with Barack Obama that looking at the United States of North America, actually non-ethno-nationalists, Obama, black, Muslim, I don't know really how much Muslim he was, representing as president the United States. Kind of weird situation, I think. And these issues had been more highlighted than the actual issues, for instance, he wanted to address. That was healthcare in the United States. And that was not the question. He resisted in terms of really engaging, fundamentally engaging in basically the orientation of make America great again. Cuba, nothing happened there with the concentration camp on Cuba. In terms of war, there was no real effort towards any peace movement. So I think these are political issues we have to address in a more fundamental way. And of course, it is difficult questions. And we need to have detailed analysis. At the same time, I think we have to step back at some stage, moving at least to a distance where we can have a broader picture, where we can have the connections and the lack of connections as in terms of the alternative. And again, this broad term, whatever the populists do, they at least they pretend to have an overall concept for the political future.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'm just conscious of the time now, so we're coming to the end of this session. I'm just a last chance, as it were, for any of the other participants to make a observation or comment. I don't think we have any more time for questions, really, but just if anybody else wants to. Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I was going to say about adding to what Mehmet teacher has said. For example, I think, do we really have another, for the common people, do we have any other viable alternatives to, for example, Trump in US? Because as Mehmet Hoca said, I don't think many people see any viable alternatives in the world, because I think the left has become nearer to the center, and I don't think more equality or economic or social equality is on the agenda of many parties. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we see many former voters of the left also are voting for the right as well.
Okay, thanks, Dunahan, for that. I'm going to take that as a final kind of comment rather than a question.
Okay.
We're ending on a little bit of a pessimistic note, I guess, but I'm just remembering Peter's last two kind of suggestions about the closing points, in fact, about the importance of respect and debate, which we can all agree with, and also I think it was a point about I had some difficulties in hearing you at that point, just like Mehmet Peter. I think, did you mention about a left culture? Was that your closing?
Well, just one remark to what Dunahan said. I agree, and at the same time, I disagree a little bit, because there are alternatives globally, not without problems. But if we look at China, as I said, not without problems, but there are the BRICS, there is cooperation with the Silk Road. If we look at Cuba, they had been looking at Cuba during the Corona pandemics. Cuba and China supported other countries. And I remember my dear friend in Italy said, how can we be left alone and we have to do everything on our own? And this was, of course, this attitude in Europe. This is in looking at migration. Italy, we have currently a legal problem there again. Can people coming to Italy actually move to other countries, or is it really the first entry thing? As I said, I don't want to say, yes, China, Cuba, this is paradise. I don't want to say Brazil or Ecuador. I remember I discussed with actually the then Prime Minister in Ecuador, the problems of internet. And he said, well, we have to open the internet for everybody free. And we know the dangers. And of course, these are issues where it's not simply an alternative, do this and then everything will be fine. But at least we have to see the approaches that exist, and we have to move on with what exists and start from there. And this is on the one hand the critique of the right, and this is on the other hand the possibilities we have. And just one aspect that bothers me at the moment very much. Keynes had been saying, and I think next year we have the 15 hours week. He said in his letters to the grandchildren, we have the capacities. At the same time, what we have in reality is unemployment rates in many countries and overwork of other. We don't use what we have, and this is, I think, where we have enough. We have enough examples, and this is where we should start.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, and on that, there was a comment from Mehmet saying realism, not pessimism. So on that realistic, albeit and somewhat hopeful note, I will bring today's session of the Human Rights Universal and Global HRUG Open session to an end. I'd like to thank everybody. We have some new faces, some new participants, I think, and thank you to them. Hopefully see you next time, and thank you to all our regular members as well. And Peter, I might just thank you to Peter, of course, for a very interesting and stimulating presentation. I think our next meeting, and Peter just confirmed with me, is the general formula for the scheduling of our HRUG Open Talks is the last Friday of each month. However, the next month we'll run into Christmas or holiday time, which that'll be awkward, and the following month in January will be the Chinese New Year. Am I right in saying that, you are? January, the end of January is the Chinese New Year. Is that right?
Perhaps you can. We talked about it. I don't remember exactly what we had been saying.
Yes, let me see. Yeah, the end of January. So it's the Chinese New Year.
So I think the proposal is that there'll be a hiatus in the sequence of HRUG Open Talk. So it seems that our next meeting will be the end of February, which will be the last Friday in February. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll keep in touch.